All right, hello, psychos. It's time for part three of our review of psychology. Now we're looking at you. You are the topic of part three, the person. Two main things to look at here: development across the lifespan, from childhood on to old age, as well as personality. What, in spite of those stages of change, what remains the same in terms of your personality? So we'll look at theories of personality traits as well. Let's see. On these four categories here, four stage theories of how we develop, could you name the names of each stage? Like, according to Freud's psychosexual stages, what are the names of each of those five? According to Piaget's intellectual or cognitive development, could you name those four? Could you name these three? And by the way, I put an X there because when it comes to moral development, according to Kohlberg, you don't really think morally before the age of 2. It's only after you start saying, no, I don't want to. When you're a little kid around the age of 2, you start thinking about moral issues. So can you name those 3 stages? And then finally, Erikson's psychosocial stages of how you relate to others. Can you name those 5? Take a moment, pause if you need more time to see if you can name each of these stages. And the answer, there you go. So that is an overview of the 4 main stage theories that are kind of famous. Psychosexual stages of Freud's, just keep in mind, he's mainly talking about personality traits, but yeah, it's Freud. Intellectual, cognitive, how we think and develop in stages of thinking ability. Moral development, again, reasoning, a sense of right and wrong, guilt, and so on, and psychosocial, relating to the world and to other people. And notice their polarities in that case. It's trust versus mistrust, or autonomy versus shame, and so on. And by the way, if you know anything about this, you know that in terms of psychosocial stages, Erikson actually had more. He went all the way through the whole lifespan. So there's 3 more stages: early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood after the age of adolescence here. We'll get to that in a second. But let's see what you know about these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to project a vocabulary term here, and I want you to see if you can figure out which box it goes in. And now first is figuring out which category it goes in. Is it psychosexual personality development, according to Freud? Is it Piaget, intellectual cognitive thinking development? Or is it going to be moral development, or is it psychosocial? And then you have to figure out which specific box it goes in. So if you do figure out it's Freudian, figure out which box specifically, what age. For example, egocentric. Pause if you need more time, but that is a Piaget concept. So it's going to go in this category, but where is it going to go? And the one to put that one is here. So egocentric is very typical of pre-operational children who are between around the age of 2 to up to around 4 or 5. This age group here, they are, really stuck inside their own perspectives. They only see from their own ego. They assume everybody is thinking and feeling what they feel. If they have a headache, they think everyone has a headache. All right, next. Pause if you need more time. But the answer is, that's Freudian. So the Oedipus complex is when you get fixated at this stage. So the phallic stage, which means genital, I don't get it confused with that, but it's at this stage where little boys and girls start to discover anatomical differences between them and the others, and mommy and daddy. And around the age of 4 and 5, it's kind of typical for them to form an attachment to the opposite sex parent and hostility toward the same sex parent. So they become daddy's girls or mama's boys, and that's kind of normal. But some people get stuck or fixated at that stage, according to Freud. Boys who get fixated and become mama's boys for life, basically, and kind of always have that frustration with father, that's called the Oedipus complex. The Electra complex is the girl version. In any case, yeah, it's Freud. Next. Authority orientation. And the answer is, this is a moral issue. So when you start identifying with authority figures like the teacher or mommy or daddy, and that's as you're moving into the conventional stage. So you start, before that, you're all motivated by external force, like your desire for reward or fear of punishment. You're being a good boy because you want a cookie. But at this point, you want to be a good boy because you want to please your mommy or please the teacher. You start tattletaling or whatever. And you're now moving into the conventional stage, in this case, identifying with that authority figure. That's also, to go back to this one, that's an indication that you're reading mommy's mind or you're reading the teacher's mind, and and you're anticipating what they're thinking and what they want. So it kind of relates to Piaget and overcoming that egocentrism. As you move to this stage, you're overcoming getting stuck inside your own head, and you're starting to realize people think differently by reading the minds of others. And that's called theory of mind, according to Piaget, but it goes hand in hand with this move into the conventional. It's also typical of kids at this age to start tattling because they know what teacher wants or mommy wants, so they start tattling on their younger siblings or something because they're reading mommy's mind. They're developing theory of mind, according to Piaget, and identifying with mommy as an authority, according to Kohlberg. Conservation. And the answer, that is Piaget, and this is concrete operational. Think con. Now, I want to talk about this one for a moment because it's probably one of the big favorites on an exam. And so in his famous experiment, Piaget had Kool-Aid test, and he had kids look at two beakers, both with an equal amount of Kool-Aid in it. And then right in front of the kid's face, he takes one of the beakers and pours it into a tall, skinny beaker. So, and then he has them compare the two beakers. All right, and he says, which one has more, or do they have the same amount? And the kids needed to figure out, oh, well, wait, it's still the same amount of Kool-Aid. You just poured it into a tall one, so it looks taller, but it's still the same amount of liquid, right? In other words, the liquid, the volume is conserved. It's still the same in essence, though it changes in appearance or form. And that is called conservation. Conservation is the realization that things are still the same. It's conserved. It's still in essence the same in volume in this case, or quantity or whatever, even though it changes in form or appearance. Well, here's the thing. You can't con a concrete operational kid. Con. And the reason is because they've acquired conservation. They know, like that's still the same amount of Kool-Aid. But if a kid who's around 5, maybe 4, the preschool kids, the pre-operational, they think like magically there's more liquid somehow. So they don't have that yet. You can con them. Terrible 2, independence. Pause if you need more time, but the answer is this one. So that's an Erickson concept, and it's autonomy versus shame or doubt. And there's a reason they call them terrible 2s. It's actually even worse when they're 3. It's because they're struggling for independence, which literally means autonomy, self-doing. I want to do it myself. And they get frustrated, and that's why they're difficult. Naive reward orientation. And the answer is, that's a moral issue, and it goes here, the pre-conventional. Because in the moral development, according to Kohlberg, there's pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Conventional means rule or law, it's not written down necessarily, but social norms. At this stage, kids don't have it yet. It's pre-conventional. So really, what are they motivated by? They're motivated by that cookie. He's being a good boy because he thinks he's going to get something, a reward. So it's naive reward orientation. Or he's afraid he's going to get spanked. He's going to get punished. So it's all externally motivated by fear of punishment or desire for a reward. It's only at this stage that they start to internalize the rules, the conventions. And now, why is he being a good boy? Not because he thinks he's going to get a cookie, because it's just the right thing to do. So kids at this stage, 6 to 12-ish, they are really obsessed with rules. They actually like those boundaries, and they like structure. And it's not until this stage, the post-conventional teen years, kids start to say, why? And they start to question, why do we have these rules? Maybe these rules need to be, examined closer. And maybe there's some things that in order to do what's right, you got to do what's wrong. So there's like moral dilemmas that, you need to reason through. Well, kids at this age, the conventional age, can't do that yet. Next, abstract logic. And that goes in this category here, and it goes here. During the intellectual cognitive stuff Piaget talks about, it's, formal operational period that teens are able to do abstract formal logic. Think algebra. It's hard to learn algebra when you're at this stage of, like 7 or 8 years old. A squared plus B squared. It's because you need concrete, tangible things in front of you to be able to think a lot. At this stage, it's only by the time you get to be a teen that you can start thinking beyond what's right in front of your face. So algebra becomes possible here in abstract hypothetical thinking. And the answer is a tough one. This goes under Freud, and that is here. It's during, I'm sorry, here, latency. It's during the age 6 to 12-ish that children start to repress feelings they may have, and so they act in the opposite way of how they feel, which is what reaction formation is. So if they're hiding something from themselves, they will act in the opposite way. So at this stage, it's typical of kids to if a little boy likes a girl in his 3rd grade class, he'll demonstrate his fondness by being mean to her, acting in the opposite way of how he really feels. Latent, if you recall, means buried or hidden. So the latency stage, they're kind of burying or hiding feelings, impulses they may have had earlier. Reversibility, and the answer is that's a Piaget issue, thinking issue, and that goes here, right here. Stage 3, the concrete operational. What it is the realization that relationships are reversible. You know, you have a relationship with your mother, but your mother also has a relationship with you, so it's a two-way street. In other words, they're starting to overcome that egocentrism that you had here, where they only see outward from their own ego. And by the way, at that point, it's called irreversibility. You know, they don't realize they have a relationship. The relationship is reversible. Animism. And the answer is that also goes here under Piaget, and it is typical of pre-operational children. What animism is inanimate objects are believed to be alive. You know, so this is the age during preschool years, pre-operational, that they think their pet rocks are alive and their stuffed animals are really talking to them and such. Next, potty training. The answer. That goes here. It's a Freudian issue, and it goes to the anal stage. Yeah, that's Freud. Because basically, let me give you this gist of Freud. All 5 of these stages, the way your personality is developing, according to Freud, is there's a conflict between your id and superego, mainly, with your ego in the middle. Now, id is your animal. It's your natural impulses, your natural needs as an animal. But we're more than just animals. We have superego. Think S for superego, S for social. So what it is nurture. It's mommy and daddy saying, that's not proper. You know, be a good boy, be a good girl. And so superego society, which starts with mommy and daddy and then friends, is telling you something that doesn't go with your id or nature. And so that creates a conflict. So your ego, which is yourself, your core self, is trying to, you know, negotiate this battle between those two. In the case of the anal stage, it's potty training, because when nature calls, you know, you go, right? But, you know, you need to learn to hold it and not go until the appropriate time and the appropriate place, the bathroom. So if potty training is kind of severe and the parents are kind of punishing a lot, you know, whenever you crap your pants, you know, then that can create kind of a trauma, because the kid's just doing what id is telling them to do, or nature is telling them. So how you negotiate that fight between it and superego is what shapes your personality, according to Freud. So that's Freud in a nutshell in terms of development. All right, so here we get to the last one. Now, we've been talking about the first 3 columns a lot, but let's talk about the last column, which was Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages. So this is Erik Erikson, and notice he has more than just the 5. We mentioned the 5 for child development, trust versus mistrust, you know. So if an infant is neglected a lot and not fed and such, of course they're going to develop a sense of mistrust of the world and people. 2, the terrible 2s and 3-year-olds, autonomy. So they're trying to do things on their own and be autonomous. If they, you know, they might otherwise develop a sense of doubt in their own abilities to do things. They might become codependent and need somebody to always do things for them and make decisions for them. The third one, roughly 4 or 5-year-olds, if you're looking at that chart again, initiating their own ideas. Like, hey, I've got an idea. Let's decorate the wall. And so that's when the kids get the crayons out and decorate the house. So if the parents are kind of punishing, like, look, you destroyed my house, you know, the kids can come out the other end, if there's a lot of that, feeling like they have to walk on eggshells and having a sense of guilt for initiating their own creativity and ideas. That's typical of 4 or 5-year-olds. Did you ever cut your own hair? I did. I was bald on one side on my first day of school. Anyway, stage 4, we're talking elementary school kids, industry versus inferiority. A lot of I words here, I know. But industry is work or resourcefulness. So remember when you were hardworking, you wanted to make a lemonade stand or build a car in the garage out of boxes or something, so industry, you figure out what you're good at and resourceful at. Oh, I'm good at sports, or I'm not good at sports, or I'm good at art, or not good. I'm good at getting in trouble, versus a sense of inferiority, the things you're not so good at. So you start to figure that out in elementary school. Mostly. And then stage 5 is those teenagers, as we were looking at. And the real question there is, who am I? A sense of identity. I'm not my parents anymore. Like, who am I? Like, I'm something different. So, versus confusion, because some people come out the other end of adolescence really still kind of confused by, who am I? But then Erickson goes beyond that. There's 3 more stages: the early adulthood stage, middle adulthood stage, and late adulthood stage, 6, 7, and 8. So during early adulthood, which we're talking 20-ish or 30-ish in our society, the main question there for them is they're struggling for intimacy, forming a nest, a bond, outside of the nest they grew up in. So getting married and having children and raising children somewhere else, possibly. Versus isolation, where they're 30-something, they might still be living with their parents, depending on the situation. Midlife, okay, your parents' age, probably. We're talking generativity, probably the weirdest word on the list. Think generativity, generate or make, right? The main question for 40 or 50-something-year-olds is often, what am I generating in life? Am I making anything of value now that my life's kind of like halfway over? It's halftime. So there's that real midlife reevaluation. It could be a crisis, but maybe not. Most typically not. But am I generating anything of value with my life? Or do I feel like I'm spinning my wheels, and do I feel stagnant? Like my career's not going anywhere. I feel like I'm in a dead end relationships, and so those kind of things become a big concern midlife. And finally, at the end of life, do you look back now that it's almost over with integrity or despair? You look back at your life like, I wish I'd do it all over again the same way. No regrets. That's integrity. Versus, all this despair where you wish you'd done things when you had the opportunity, or you wish you hadn't done this or that. So integrity versus despair. All right, so I'm going to play a game here. I'm going to basically have you use these as kind of like a word bank, and I'm going to just throw out some questions about developmental psychology. All right, so out of the list here, which one of these is, let's see, what a term for people who are abandoned as kids or locked away in a closet for years? Feral children. So feral children, or wild child, is what that literally means, cases where they're dumped off in the forest or something. But we learn, developmental psychologists are very interested in that, because what happens when a child is deprived of nurture that normal children would get, and feral children cases reveal something about that. Okay, which of these options up here is a term in neurology for flexibility in the brain or growth in neurons? The answer, plasticity. So plasticity is a kind of new term, and they basically are saying that your brain is more flexible or plastic than they used to think. They used to think that at a certain age, your brain's kind of done and it's not going to change. But now they realize as adult brains can change and form connections and are more flexible than they once thought. So they're more plastic, or have more plasticity, I guess you could say. Okay, which one of these up here is actually kind of the opposite? The notion that at a certain time your brain is through. If these crucial things haven't happened in development, it's too late now after the age of 8 or 12. And the answer, critical period. So the opposite of plasticity, really. The old notion is that there's critical windows, and like you need to learn language by the age of whatever, like 12 or something, certainly. By the age of 12, if you haven't, it's too late after that. You need to your eyes need to be stimulated for your brain and the occipital lobe to form those connections for vision. So if there are any cataracts or any obstructions to the eye, need to be cleared up as soon as possible during that critical window of brain development, because even if you clear that up later in the brain, it's like past that point, then it's too late. The brain won't form. But that's not the case. That's the notion of critical period. And that is true to some extent for some things. But as I said, plasticity, the research there shows that it's a lot more flexible than they once thought, even after those critical periods are over. Okay, which one of these up here is, let's see, still today, one of the more standard ways of testing depth perception in babies? The answer, visual clef. So these plexiglass drop off where the baby could crawl out over the plexiglass, but it drops off, underneath, so it looks like you're going to fall. And the baby pauses, then they've developed depth perception. They're not going to go out because they think they're going to fall. Which one of these up here is a kind of research that involves tracking children as they grow up? Sometimes they can last decades, these types of studies. Answer, longitudinal. So a longitudinal study is a long time. So the word longitudinal, long term. Some of them last, they're tracking the children all the way through adolescence and adulthood. It could be decades. So that's a pretty good way of following the same subjects as they grow up, learning a lot about them. Okay, which one of these up here is a type of research that instead of long-term, you could do it now by doing a side-by-side comparison of different age groups right now. So you take some 3-year-olds, some 5-year-olds, some 9-year-olds, and do a side-by-side comparison in certain abilities. The answer, cross-sectional. So longitudinal is long-term using the same subjects. Cross-sectional is a side-by-side comparison of different groups. And you could do it now, so it's not long-term. But it's different subjects, so, and people are different. But still, not everybody has all the time in the world to, follow someone their whole lives. Okay, which one of these up here is, we'll get into people a little bit here. Did a famous study on how people face the end, like death, how they confront that they're going to die, or if they go through the grieving process. And that's Kubler-Ross. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross found that as people confronted death, they tend to go through the DABDA stages, D-A-B-D-A, denial, always, no, surely me, not me, I'm going to live forever. D-A for, what is A? Suddenly it has escaped me. Anger, that's right. So they start lashing out at the world. Raging at people. D-A-B, B for bargaining. They're like, please, God, just give me more time. Please, life, give me a little more, one more year. D for depression, and that indicates they're actually moving into the next level. And finally, A for acceptance, kind of like it's happening. I've lived a good life. D-A-B-D-A. All right, which one of these up here is somebody who did a famous study on how important it is for cuddling or contact comfort with a bonding between a mother and an infant? And the answer, Harry Harlow, or Harry Monkey Harlow, as I like to call him. Because Harry Harlow did a number of studies with little baby monkeys, isolating them from their mothers and stuff. And one, he had 2 fake mothers in there. One was like provided food, but it was not cuddly. The other one was cuddly and warm, and the babies could snuggle with it. And he found, surprisingly, that they preferred, when they were scared and stuff, they preferred the cuddly one to the one that actually provided food, which you'd think that's a basic need. But in any case, the main takeaway from Harry Harlow is that we need contact comfort, especially infants, for brain growth. It's as essential as food itself. All right, which one of these up here is someone, a researcher, who criticized Kohlberg? Now, remember, Kohlberg was the moral development about pre-conventional, conventional, and such. The answer, Gilligan. Gilligan found there were sex problems there. By that I mean like male or female, boys or girls. And they found that in terms of moral reasoning, girls just think differently and develop differently than boys. So from a sexist kind of point of view, Carol Gilligan, just think Gilligan's Island. Found some flaws in the way that Kohlberg did research, emphasizing boys and assuming that applied to girls too. All right, so which one of these? I'll just cut to the chase on this one. Lev Vygotsky, which is sometimes doesn't pop up as much, and so you may have missed that one. Vygotsky, think he's Russian, and he was during the Soviet era, so think communist, all right, if that helps you here, because the thing he emphasized was community or social as essential for thinking development. Now, Piaget said we naturally go through those stages we mentioned a moment ago on the chart, natural stages of thinking development. But Vygotsky says now it's essential that you have social or communal connections for thinking to develop. It's not always so natural. And so Vygotsky is going to emphasize the community. So again, think communism. So like language, that's an important one for him. Like language is a social thing, and you can't think without language really. It's like really hard. I don't even know if it's possible. So it requires it. So that's the main takeaway there. He mentioned something called the ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development, which is the gap between what you by yourself can learn in terms of thinking and then what society could teach you, but there's that gap in between. So, and certainly society is where we get, how we form most of our thought. So let's see. Last thing here finally is attachment styles. Styles of attachment, there's 3: secure, anxious ambivalent, and avoidant. And they did this very famous study in which they basically had a 1-year-old have the mom left the 1-year-old in a strange room with a stranger. And now, when you're 1, kids freak out at that. That's kind of normal. So when mom leaves, the baby starts crying. In the case of secure attachment, that's what they do. But when mom comes back and they reunite, yay, the baby's all happy. They're good. So that's a secure attachment. They're consoled. Oh, yes, mom's back. Second case, when mom leaves, the baby cries. So far, you're like, well, that's kind of normal. Mom comes back, the baby continues to cry. All right, and 15 minutes later, the baby's still crying. So in this case, it's anxious ambivalent. Anxious meaning nervous. They continue to be nervous, like they have, it's abandonment fears is what it is. So the baby continues to have this intense anxiety. And ambivalent, the reason the word ambivalent is used in anxious ambivalent is just because you're unsure. You're like, is mom going to abandon me again? And finally, the third one is avoidant. When mom left, those babies didn't even seem to they whimpered a little bit. Sometimes they cried a little, but not much. It's like they didn't have a relationship with mom in the first place, an attachment, that is. When mom came back, they continued to sit there. And one of the things is, one of the operational definitions of being secure is if they were comfortable enough to explore and play in the playroom. Well, those babies didn't. They just kind of sat there. So they didn't really venture out into the room away from mother. So they didn't have security in that sense. So that's avoidant. They seem to have avoided a connection to mom. All right, so personality theories. Let's go here and play a game. So let's see what you know about personality. Can you name the big 5? Now, the big 5, I just want to say this right from the start. This is the most personality test that is most supported by science than any others, more than the Myers-Briggs or anything else, the big 5. They analyzed thousands of adjectives to describe personality, and then they found that, by analyzing all those adjectives, they could categorize them into these 5 categories. I like to call it the ocean, O-C-E-A-N. But this one is, you ready for the answer? Is canoe. So the letters are just rearranged. So the first one is C. So conscientiousness is what the C stands for there. The word conscientious means organized. I know that's a weird way to use the word conscientious. Sometimes people are surprised, but it means you're organized, you're punctual, you're a list person if you're conscientious. On the other end, you're sloppy and careless and disorganized and impunctual. The second word is A for agreeableness or amiability. So people who are soft-hearted, warm-hearted, they're helpful. They have such a big heart, and they're amiable or agreeable. Versus people like, I got mine, I don't care about you. And by the way, a little bit being too much of either is not good. It's because people will walk all over you if you're overly to the left side on that. So keep that in mind. The third one here, calm, secure, self-satisfied versus anxious, N. So far we have C, A, N, and N stands for neuroticism or nervous, anxious. So people who are kind of tense versus people who are really relaxed. So all those adjectives and traits that go with that fall under this category. The fourth one, open-minded. Oh, I just said it. It's openness. Okay, open-minded, imaginative versus people who are kind of structured. They like routine. They don't like change. So people who have scored the left side of this, openness, like change. And finally, the last one, C-A-N-O-E, like the big canoe, or as I said, rearrange the letters and it can spell ocean. And so the last one here is extrovert or introvert. So extroversion or introversion. So do you get, like to be social versus, you're okay with being social, but you need to kind of be on your own to recharge. All right. Question 2 in personality. What kind of tests are these? And the answer is, pause if you need more time, but these are projective tests. So basically the idea is that you're unconsciously projecting onto something outside of you. And then a trained psychoanalyst can read between the lines and say, oh, well, this means whatever. The Rorschach tests are the ink blot ones, where the way you describe the ink, You don't even realize it, but you're describing something about yourself in a way. The TAT test, or the thematic apperception test, basically they show you a series of images and you tell stories. So again, a trained psychoanalyst can read between the lines and you kind of develop themes in the way you tell stories. Usually it's to tell the difference between achievement-motivated people versus affiliation or socially motivated people in the way you tell stories. That's the original reason they developed the TAT cards. Number 3. What is the most widely used personality test by professionals? The answer is the MMPI, not the Big Five, even though I said the Big Five has the most science behind it, and the Myers-Briggs is a real popular one, but the one most widely used by professional psychologists is the MMPI, and MMPI stands for Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory or something like that. But anyway, the reason it's most widely used by professionals is because they're clinical psychologists usually. Remember, they're the ones that diagnose, and part of the standard diagnosis process is to assess personality using the MMPI to see if personality has a reason for maybe your schizophrenia or whatever. Number 4. According to Carl Rogers, the famous humanist psychologist, what's the overlap here? And the answer is congruence of self-concept. So when you see yourself accurately and the best version of yourself accurately, that's a congruent self-concept. But he said, incongruence is another term of his where they don't overlap. You don't see yourself accurately, or you have you're like a low self-esteem when really or vice versa, you're full of yourself, and that's not really accurate either. So that leads to all kinds of issues in personality if you're incongruent in self-concept. Number 5, Maslow. Now, if you remember, he's the other humanist you probably learned about in addition to Rogers. Could you name these 5 stages? Now you start with the bottom, right? What's motivating people at the bottom is physiological things like thirst and food and so on. Once you satisfy that, you can move up to the next level, which is safety and security. And once you feel safe and secure and people aren't trying to kill you, you're motivated by things like belonging, right? Social needs, a sense of fitting in with an in-group. Once you find your people, your in-group that you belong with, you start to form the 4th level here, which is self-esteem, and that's what motivates you more. And finally, once you satisfy all these, the top one there is self-actualization, or fulfilling your fullest potential. Now, self-actualization, I just want to say, in his last years, Maslow realized that there's maybe a higher one. He called it self-transcendence. So what's after you're gone? What motivates you, while you're still alive? Like one day you're going to be gone, so what are you going to leave to the world? Okay, defense mechanisms. So if you remember, the psychoanalyst probably had the most to say about personality development, and one aspect of your personality is that you hide things from yourself, according to Jung and Freud and Adler. And so we lie to ourselves in various ways to make ourselves feel better. So here, let's play a little game. Which one of those to the left is taking it out on something other than what caused it? The answer? Displacement. Next. And the answer? Next. And the answer? Next. And the answer is? Next. The answer is and that's an interesting one. Sometimes when you are in denial or hide things from yourself, you actually accuse others of it, project it onto them when they may be innocent of that. And the answer, compensation, or sometimes it's called overcompensation. It's important you remember that it stems from a feeling of inferiority. And the answer, now this is not just regular daydreaming, this is stress-induced daydreaming of how you wish things would have turned out. And the answer, And it's important to know there's two types. Well, there's one basic type, which is identification with somebody in power to make yourself feel better, boost your ego. But there's also identifying with the aggressor or bully. So sometimes when people are abused, like in a hostage situation, sometimes the hostages will actually befriend their captors, and help them. It's strange. Sometimes they'll fall in love with somebody who's abusing them. It's a very strange thing that can happen to some people to cope. And finally, the last one. This is a weird one, but if you're hiding things from yourself, sometimes, because if you were to come out directly with it, people would shun you, possibly, or throw you in jail. So it's shameful. So you hide it from yourself even, but it's got to come out. So it comes out as sublimation. It comes out as something more creative or something kind of similar, but more socially acceptable. I know that's a little weird, but let's test to see if you've got this stuff down, because the thing is, on the exam, they don't just want you to know definitions. They want to see if you can apply it in real life situations. So they have a lot of those. So let's test your knowledge here, and this is the last thing we'll do today. Pause if you need more time, but see if you can name each of these defense mechanisms. All right, here's your answers. All right, so how'd you do? So, different ways we cope with stress or things, and we try to hide things from ourselves to boost our ego. So that's it for personality and the person today. Remember, vocabulary is the key to a lot of this. See you guys next time.